Well, if he's not here, then, you know, that's the problem. You go occupy this and that. First come, first serve. You're not here, you're not. Okay? No such thing as reservations here. Okay? Go! Go get... Mag-propose pa kayo dyan? Okay.
It's 27, starting lang.
This one here, Leslie. Phil, you need to grab a chair from next door.
Yes, please.
Grab a horse.
Do you remember our chapter in AR?
Yeah.
What ratios do you remember from there? Yes, yes, it is. Accounts receivable, turnover, and number of days
Collection period.
or collection period, number of days outstanding, right? And then we go to inventory, and then we see the same kind of ratios more or less, right? What was the last kind of ratio that we computed for? Return on common stockholders' equity and earnings per share, right? Good. Well, here, when we went to the long-term liability section, okay, there are a couple of ratios that our chapter recommends that we look at so that we can better appreciate the current company standing when we do read the balance sheet, number one. And number two, if we do decide to compare it with another corporation, you know, we'll be computing the same kind of ratios and compare them, you know, side by side. Okay? One is called the debt to equity ratio, or then the equity. Debt to asset, mamaya pala yung debt to equity. One is the debt to asset ratio, and the other one is the time interest earned. Okay, without knowing much yet, no, about anything, let's try to read into what the names represent or what the words represent. The debt, and then the asset, and then it is a ratio. You know how a ratio works, right? Right? What is the mathematical operation that needs to be done here? Is it addition? Is it subtraction? What is the math? It's a ratio. What kind of mathematical operation there?
Division.
Division, right? So, okay, alam na natin, ratio, division. Okay? Do we know what debt is? Where do we find this? Do you know this?
Yes.
Okay, so more or less, even before we go to the next slide or in your next page, what can you picture as a guess about this particular ratio? What na?
Liabilities of the
You probably get the debt. And then you probably go to get the ratio. I mean, get the assets into division and get the ratio. How much debt to the total assets? Why do you think that is important? Think about the relationship. Yes,
To know how many assets.
Amber.
To know how many assets we have against our liability.
Yeah, very good. Why is that important kaya? Because, you know, why would that be relevant kaya?
For repayment.
Well,
For repayment.
who would be to repayment? So if it's repayment, who would be interested to look at that? Other hands. Sharon? Okay na, sige. Masaya tayo ngayon.
You get your own share.
Who would be interested? What particular group, let's say?
Credit cards.
Credit card? Did I say credit card? Did I say, listen, I hear credit card. No, it's not creditors. Creditors. Why? Yeah, because if corporation is applying for a new loan, wait a minute, let's see first, how much debt do you have and how much is that in relation to your total assets? And can you afford an additional loan? Well, that's one, right? And then just the stability of a company, even if you're an investor, you might want to look into that as well. Okay? Now, the time interest earned is very related to this ratio. But this one is more concerned about the interest payments that the corporation is currently making. You know what interest payments are, right? Interest expense for them, right? There is the presence of interest expense. That means that what? What does that mean? If a company is paying interest expense, what do they have? They have a loan service. They have debt. They have an existing debt. Is that automatic for us to think about? Alright, so now, this ratio more or less approximates or estimates the ability of a company, just based on the financial statement, how to pay, its capability of paying interest when it is due based on the asset that they have or the earnings that they have, okay? So, very, very quickly, in your book, page
525.
that one, okay, there is that example of Kellogg Company, and let us compute for their debt to asset ratio. Their total liabilities is 8925 million. So how much is that in real numbers? If it is 8925 million, 8.9 billion. Right? Tama ba? And their total assets is 11.2 billion, really, or 11,200 million. Okay? So the debt, the ratio of the liabilities to the total assets is 79.7%. Let's say you. The greater this number is, the less and less attractive the company is looking. Right? The closer it is. Because you want assets to outnumber or outweigh debt. Right? So this one is pretty high in my personal opinion, but you can't just take this singularly. You have to compare it with other companies, particularly competitors or industry averages, or itself over a period of years. How is it doing? What if it came pala from 95% and then now it is 79.7? So that's kind of good pala. Okay, so we cannot be too judgmental based on just one number. Okay? Now, same company, when you have to compute for times interest earned, this is, how much more debt can they afford, more or less, okay? And this one is, how many times, if they take their net income, okay, how many times over can they pay interest? Because right now, interest expense is at a rate of 295 per year, okay? So this is 295 million, I suppose. Yes, 295 million. The thing is, you get net income, and this net income assumes that this is after taxes. If it is after taxes, then you have to add it back. Okay? This is net income after taxes, the very, very bottom line, right? So, earnings before taxes, let's say, is 100. Okay? Income taxes, let's say, is 10. Diba? So, net income after taxes is what? 90. Okay? So, if you are working with net income after taxes, this is what you have as a number. The formula needs to incorporate this, so you add it back. So, in essence, it's like EBT, if you have it. Or if not, just this. This plus this. What's the other one? Interest. So, actually, earnings before taxes. Earnings before interest and taxes. Diba? Okay? That's why when you get to finance, if you're not there already, you know, they have the finance people call this EBIT. Okay? So, EBIT, let's say, is 100 to 10, and interest expenses is 10, so EBT is 100, etc. So if you're working with this number, you want to add this back, and you want to add this back, which in effect is EBIT. Okay? Okay? Alright. So, you get that as a numerator, divided by the interest expense right now. Okay? In my hypothetical example, what is the interest expense? Okay, dito. So, if I were to convert it here, it will be 110 divided by 10. Right? Okay? But it is this. So they can pay it 6 times over or almost 7 times over, which is a good sign. So while they are kind of heavy on debt, they are able to pay interest and service interest. So that's a good sign. Okay? Now, okay, so that's the ratio. I want you to kind of practice your ratios, and that will be part of our Friday. What do we have on Friday? Quiz or test? So, here's the why do we study debt and equity? What's debt and equity? What's debt? The liabilities composed of short term or long term, right? Or current and long term. And then what is equity? It's equity. I mean, in the balance sheet, what is it composed of? So paid-in capital, right? Paid-in capital will be retained earnings, right? Okay. But mostly, what you're saying is it's really the capital composition of a company, right? Its whole capital can either be debt, which is a liability to certain groups of people, whether investment banks, or bondholders, right? Investors like that. Or it can be internal investors like common stockholders and even preferred stockholders. That is the equity side, okay? Now, it is important for us to be exposed to where the capital is coming from, right? Is it coming from debt? Or is it coming from equity? Equity representing mostly common stockholders. Why do you think it is important to kind of segregate it like that? In the context of capital structure. Where is your capital coming from? Why is it important kaya? Any guesses? Is there a difference between debt from the obligation point of view of the corporation? Is there a difference between debt obligations and obligations to common stockholders? Is there a difference? What is your obligation to debt holders? You pay off the debt, right? At a certain maturity date. And another thing is, there is interest, right? What is your obligation to common stockholders? Is that a fixed obligation that you really need to comply? So is there a difference? Might there be a preference by some to go one side over the other, knowing that there are certain obligations attached to one that may not be present in another? Right? So, that is why we are now in that stage wherein we are analyzing the capital structure of a company. Because we have seen that. We've been from, corporations, and therefore, the common stock and paid in capital, right? And then we move to long-term liabilities, particularly mortgage and bond payables, right? And those are sources of capital. Remember? Do you agree? Okay. And one thing that I think I got to mention in the second section, but maybe not in the first, correct me if I'm wrong, not in the earlier section. Ultimately, top management's goal is to make sure that they get cheap capital. Did I mention that in your class? That is the objective. To make sure that they can obtain the cheapest capital possible. What do you mean in the context of what we discussed yesterday, that class, especially section 1? What were we computing? Weren't we computing cost of borrowing?
Yes.
Isn't that the same as cost of capital? Okay. Why are we learning how to compute for the cost of borrowing? So we know the cost of our capital, right? Because what is the goal? To get the cheapest capital possible. Okay? And in order to best suit or attain that objective, we need to understand our capital structure. Debt, equity. Obligation for debt, obligation for equity. All that is a really challenging balancing act. Okay? Alright. So, things to consider about when we look at the capital structure. Are you with me still? Do you understand where I'm taking you from and to? Any questions? None so far. Okay. So, in bond financing, okay, it says here that in analyzing bond financing, one of the advantages is that there is no dilution of stockholder control. Who can help me explain that? There is no dilution of stockholder control when you issue bonds.
So it says that if they're issued bonds, it doesn't give them the voting rights to bondholders. So the stockholders or the owners retain their control over the company.
You agree? Yeah. Right? If they do decide to go with bonds as the source of capital, then that one advantage is that the set of stockholders that we have now, with them, they won't change anything as far as control is concerned, right? Now, another thing about bond financing is that interest is an expense, right? Because di ba that's the name of the account? Ay, sus! Nga pala, merong ganun, di ba? Maharang ako dun sa camera, sorry. Remind me, ha? Okay. Interest, what is the full name of interest? Interest, expense, di ba? The last name is expense, right? Interest expense. And as an expense, it shows up in the income statement?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that interest expense is somewhere here?
Yes.
Oh, where? Oh, parang it's this one, right? Right? And therefore, okay, look at this also. What is this? Okay, what is this based on? What's 10? What's 10 of taxes? What's your guess on how 10 was probably arrived at? Wild guess.
10%.
Hmm?
10% of EBT.
So there is a percentage, right? Of what? Applied to what? of EBT, right? So in this particular hypothetical example, the tax rate is 10%, correct? Well, guess what? If there was no interest expense, meaning probably they did not want to issue bonds and instead probably they issued common stock. Will this be present? No. So how much will this be, EBT? 110. So how much is taxes?
11.
Which has more? The one with the bond issuance or without the bond issuance?
Without.
Which has more? Without the bond issuance, you pay more taxes. So that's why they say that if you issue debt like that, it can be good for taxes. That is the advantage here, the tax saving result. Okay, that's what they refer to because of this computation here. You get it? Okay, so that's one advantage. Do you see dividend expense? Have you ever seen that account? Dividend expense? Is there such a thing? Why not? There is no expense. Dividend is not an expense. Where does it go? Does it go to the income statement, dividends? Where does it go? Straight to the retained earnings. And therefore, will dividends have an effect here? Will it give you tax benefits? So that's another case. That's the difference. You get it? Alright. And finally, a lot of people, investors and probably potential investors and creditors alike, okay, will always look at the EPS. And what does this stand for again? Earnings per share, okay? And we do understand because we know how to compute for this, right, Hermie? Okay. So, you will see later on that earnings per share, okay, can be affected depending on what kind of source of capital you choose, whether it is bond or common stock, okay? Because in issuing bonds, this is probably going to be higher more often than not. And so if this is a basis or a ratio that you want to protect and make attractive, okay, then this is truly an advantage of bond issuance. Okay? Let's take a look at that. So here is an example of a company, Microsystems, okay? Ay, oh, thank you. Grabe, no? So, just sit down. Na-OC ako, or pwede ba, mo, ayusin mo na, so, si Mark na lang. Thank you. So, here's this company, no? And they want some money. Why do they want money? Because, what page is this in? 526, okay. Microsystem needs money because they need to construct a 5 million plant. Okay, so they need money. That's a sizable amount, right? Okay, so now, what is the objective of top management? What is the one thing that they need to look out for? The cheapest capital. But along with cheapest capital, they have to look at the whole landscape as well and weigh the options, okay? But anyway, to illustrate a certain decision versus another that will have an effect on EPS, let's take a look at this example. This company really has EBIT. What's EBIT? Before interest and taxes, okay? It has 1.5 EBIT, okay? And right now it does not have debt, just right now. But if they plan to issue bonds, okay, they will be paying interest at a rate of 8%. That is the bond interest rate. You with me? And how much is the money that they need to raise? 5 million, right? So, if they choose to issue bonds, how much is the interest that they need to pay? 400,000, right? And that is for a Plan B scenario. Plan B is to issue bonds, right? What's another option? If they don't issue bonds but they want to raise 5 million, what's another option? Issue stock. Okay. So, if they issue bonds, this EBIT will now be reduced by 400,000. And then EBT is 1.1 million. Tama ba?
Yeah.
Alright. Does it make sense that if they issue common stock, if they follow this alternative, this will be 0? Is this accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, EBIT ba to or EBT?
EBT.
EBT is 1.5, right? Okay? Now, how do we apply not interest? Income taxes? It is at a rate of 30% applied on EBT, right? So 30% on 1.5 million is 450. 30% on 1.1 million EBT is 330. Make sense? Who pays less taxes? Plan B pays less taxes, right? Okay. So, the net income that they will now post will be $1,050,000 if they decide to do common stock. If they decide to do bonds, then it will be 770. Okay? So, if assuming that they have currently outstanding shares of 100,000 outstanding, this option means that you will, to compute for EPS, roughly, you just get this, the net income, divided by what, Matt?
100,000.
Divided by the current outstanding number of shares. Therefore, it is 7.70 EPS, right? But, if they go with Plan A, and what is Plan A again? Issue common stock. Will outstanding shares change? Yes. And it is for information by how much? By 200 to make it a total of how many outstanding shares? 300. So now, we go 1050 or 1,050,000 divided by 300. EPS, that is why that third advantage that was outlined in the previous slide said one advantage is that if you issue bonds, EPS is better than when you issue common stock. Okay? It's all about math, no? And a lot of people, they rely on a lot of ratios and math like this. Like Peter, right? Because you're a financial analyst, right? So now, what say you? Is this the only basis of decision that you will be using? No. This is just one part, small part. How important is taxes to you? Right? How important is control and the illusion of control to you? Right? How important is EPS to you? How important is this in order probably to attract, I don't know, people to look into your company? Because this, after all, is the bottom line that a lot of people look into, right? So all that in play, it's up to you, the boss. But at least you know what to choose from. Okay? Alright. Like I said, I'm skipping operating and capital lease altogether. Yeah, that's it. And that is the end of chapter
wala pong magawa si Arch.
Sorry?
Miss, wala pong magawa si Arch.
Paki-pause muna, Matt, para ano.